Hello, I'm Tom Rogers and this is the Rebel Education Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rebel Education Podcast with myself, Tom Rogers, where I discuss some of the biggest topics in education today. On this podcast, I'm joined by Rubab Ali. Say hello, Ruby.
Hey.
Hey, Ruby. And in this podcast, we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, which is the life and challenges for a young Muslim girl growing up in Great Britain today. Obviously, it's a very, very important topic to discuss for various reasons, and we're going to do our best to hit on the main issues that a young person from the Muslim community in Great Britain might face. Ruby, do you want to explain, or try to explain, why I've invited you onto this podcast to discuss this issue? So you might want to start with your background and why, what your story is.
Hey guys, so my name's Ruby, I'm 21, I grew up in South Wales. Just for background information, I'll be graduating this month from the University of Birmingham with a degree in philosophy, religion and ethics. And in September, I'll be starting my PGC year for religious studies. So Tom has invited me onto this podcast to talk about the challenges that I've experienced growing up as a young British Muslim in a Western society. A lot of my experiences a lot of it's to do with education, the impact of education in my life and how education has supported me and helped me. So if you saw me a few years back, I was wearing a headscarf, I was a devout Muslim, but now I consider myself as agnostic in a sense that, I doubt the truth of any religion or ideology. And, coming to this stage there's been many steps, there's been many challenges. And someone who's going on to become an RE teacher, I feel like there is a story and there's a message. There's a message, and Tom has given me the opportunity to share that. So hopefully that will be answered in all of his questions.
Ruby, that's fantastic, and I have to say that the reason, how we came across each other was originally through Twitter. It was a few years ago, where I'd written an article about extremism in schools, and your account, I think you were engaging with that article, and I just noticed that you, at that time, you were maybe 19, 20 years old, and your opinions were really strong, and they really stood out to me, and I was really interested to know more, and then we've kind of kept in touch, haven't we? So now we're up to a point where, and I'm sure you won't mind me saying this, that I've seen the work that you've been doing, and I believe that what you're doing is really, really important, significant, will be significant, and I feel as though you're doing a lot of good things at the moment. We'll talk about those in the podcast, but before we go on to that, you went to school in South Wales, was it? Originally?
Yes. Newport, so
so you in Newport, and I remember you telling me once that you were head girl, weren't you, at that school? Were you head girl?
Yeah, I was.
I don't want to embarrass you, but you did tell me once that you were.
Yeah.
That's an accolade. That is. You should be proud of that. I
am proud of it.
There you go.
Yeah.
What I was going to ask you again, just to come back to this idea of a young person who either is a Muslim or identifies as a Muslim, female, growing up in the United Kingdom. Now, obviously, you're in university now in Birmingham, or you've just finished in Birmingham, haven't you? Or you're finishing. What do you think the key challenges are for a teenage Muslim girl growing up in a predominantly Muslim community in Britain?
I think it's just about fitting in the sense that I feel we often have clashes between values. So in Western society, we live in a postmodern society, so we have the idea that, all faiths and all cultures, they're all equal. But I feel like with Islam, with traditional Islam, you have this idea that, Islam is supposed to be superior to all religions. And then there's a clash of, who gets to have their voice heard. So I feel like we have this case with the protests in Birmingham, the anti-LGBT protests, where we have, this education system wants to promote secularism. They want every community to feel welcomed. So they're going to teach about the LGBT community. They're legally recognized in the UK. They have their rights. Whereas those Muslims that were protesting, they felt that it clashed with their values. They didn't recognize that, that's just another marginalized community in Britain, just as Muslims are. They saw it as, no, we want to have the spotlight. We want that power in that some sense. So I feel like we have those clashes of values of do we have to compromise? Do Muslims have to compromise? Like, do we have to compromise our values now? So
yeah,
I think that's
I mean, would you say, I mean, presumably, obviously, would you distinguish between Islam and kind of political Islam? I mean, I'm not an expert here, but the what would you say the difference is between those two, and also how aware do you think a teenage girl or a teenage boy would be aware of the difference between those two? Do you think that?
Yeah, I think when teenagers especially, they're not aware of it. This is something that people, even the Muslim community, I feel like they're not aware of it, because Islam is a religion where the state and the mosque, for example, like it is all one. It's a political system. All of it's like one. I feel like it's something that you'd only understand if you really studied it academically. Like even if you study Islamic courses, the distinction isn't made very clear. So, there definitely is a difference. Islam is a religion where it has beliefs, there's practices. That can be a private matter, completely private matter. And most Muslims, majority of Muslims are like that. Yeah. They're not into news. They're not trying to enforce anything, any political activity or anything like that. But then we also have the political aspect of Islam, where a lot of people, academics, would call Islamism. And that's the idea of politically expanding Islam across borders and nations. And that's more about, hegemony and so on.
Yeah, and we you mentioned that the protests in Birmingham, just in case listeners aren't aware, because they might be listening from outside the UK, is Birmingham's a city in the Midlands in the UK. There's been a series of protests where I'm not entirely sure on the full details of it, but I know that some schools had to be closed. Yeah. I know that the head teachers of certain schools have been threatened because they brought in a program, a series of lessons, a package of lessons, if you like, about LGBT rights. Now, what was in that package of lessons, I'm not entirely sure. I haven't seen it, but I believe it was about promoting equality, presumably above everything else. And I think, again, I haven't spoken to anyone involved in the protest, but I think the issue was that certain elements of the community didn't feel comfortable with homosexuality being discussed with their children. Now, I don't want to get too much into theology here. Obviously, I'm a Christian, so I know that in the Bible, as kind of the more extreme elements of the Christian community have their own issues with homosexuality, as we well know. Well, let's not get into the technicalities of theology, but certainly in the mainstream, it's I would say in mainstream Christianity, homosexuality is now accepted. It's an accepted thing. It's not. Yeah,
I think it is in Protestantism. But in Catholicism, you'll still have that.
Well, you say I don't think it is accepted in Protestantism, full stop. Because obviously, if you went to an evangelical church in the United States that would be Protestant, I think you would find that perhaps it's not as much. But yes, I just think it's you look at the Anglican Church, for example. It's fully accepted now that a priest, even a practicing priest, can be gay. So things are, but in Islam, I'm completely ignorant really of where where the Muslim community as a whole stands, for example, on the issue of homosexuality, and how that plays out for teenagers in a predominantly Muslim school. Or maybe it doesn't, but maybe it doesn't because the predominant students in the school are Muslim, so maybe it doesn't play out there, but it is a concern for me because I'm not really sure how that would play out.
Well, the thing is, there was a recent survey done in 2016 that identified that more than half of British Muslims believed homosexuality should be illegal.
Yes.
And it was 47% that believed that a gay person should not be allowed to teach. So Muslims have always been very clear on their position on homosexuality. They're very clear that they object to it. So, when we had the anti-LGBT protests, a lot of people were surprised by it, but given, the statistics and the attitude of British Muslims, it really wasn't surprising. It was almost foreseeable that at some point this was going to happen. Do you
think British society is in denial about these statistics?
I think they're not in denial. It's just that I think they have a lot of hope that, everybody wants to be included. So I think it was quite disturbing it's quite hypocritical to see a marginalized community victimizing another marginalized community. That's how I saw it. Like, if the tables were turned, if we had the case where, for example, let's just say the protesters were non-Muslims protesting against schools teaching Islamic lessons, there would be uproar. That would be outright Islamophobic. They'd be like, because, that's going to incite anti-Muslim bigotry, there's going to be a lot of fear around it, a lot of discrimination. But if it's the other way around, now that we have anti-LGBT protesters saying, it's not homophobic, it's not our values. Well, no, like if you want this community, if you want to be accepted, then you'd have to accept the other. That's the only way a diverse society is going to succeed. No one can have the claim over truth. It has to be, we have to have that postmodern kind of mindset where all these religions are just ideas. And that's how we have to see it. We can't have one religion over another. Even though Christianity is the state religion, even Christians have to, we have bishops in parliament, but they have to be more silent because of the diverse society that we have. We can't have one religion speaking for everyone else. And I think that's what really worries me about the anti-LGBT protests and sentiments, because it is blatant hypocrisy. And I feel like some of these people have become so blind in their prejudice that they don't see this. So I did find it quite worrying, but same time not surprising. And I think what it really sends a message. I think it says a lot about the Muslim community in terms of how much they are progressing and how much they're talking about things. That's what it is. Like, how much leaders are we talking about things? I feel like the protests represent a desperate need for Muslim leaders to recognise the times are changing. And if Britain is to be an inclusive and tolerant society, then Muslims have to look beyond the sacred canopies, and they have to address the needs and respect and educate. They have to educate the Muslim community about respecting those who they disagree with. I mean, Muslims are capable of doing that for other faith groups and other cultures, for atheists and Christians and Jews and Hindus. Then why not for the LGBT community? It seems like they've been victimized by these groups.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, you're just to kind of move on slightly from that. You obviously you mentioned earlier in the episode about the fact that you might now consider yourself an agnostic. What's been your journey, if you like, from, because you mentioned that you used to wear the veil, or I'm not sure what. Yeah. So what's been your journey from there to here? Because to me, that's a very, again, I could be wrong, but that seems like a very brave step to take for what are you, 21 now?
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems a very brave kind of transition to make, given everything you've just said. So what made you take that path? What drove you down that road?
So it is a long journey. It all began in school. I mean, I guess it begins with my interest. I've always had an eye for philosophy, just finding answers for myself, thinking more deeply about the world. And the way my thought process is, I'll read books, I'll gain knowledge, I'll encounter experiences, and then I make my conclusion. But the way Islam teaches, the way I was taught in mosque, and the way my family think in the home is that, oh, you can think of whatever you want, you can research, you can learn about everything, but your conclusion has to be whatever Islam says. And that is where I had a clash, because in school I was introduced to new ideas, and they really did open my eyes, like just questioning God's existence, and looking at the idea of the hijab. And when you look at the for and against arguments, when you've always been taught that this is the only way, and then you learn about the other side, then it makes you think. So back in school, it was around the A-level time where I had this, like, it's kind of, at that time it was scary, but looking back at it, it was like a revolution. Like, my studies really opened me up to like a new world. Like, oh, there's so much out there, there's so much to think about. So that's when it all began. And I used to have like doubts and stuff, but I kept it to myself. I didn't really tell anyone, because there was a lot of fear around it in my house and in the community. But like eventually I introduced myself, I continued reading, and I was introduced to, reformist Muslims that think like me. And I came across someone called Irshad Manji. She's on Twitter, you can follow her. She's a Canadian author. She's a professor, a reformist Muslim, and she's a gay Muslim. And it was just amazing discovering her at the age of 19.
Yeah.
When I read her book, Allah, Love and Liberty, it's incredible, because she has such an unconventional identity. And for someone, a young Muslim, it really stretched my imagination. Like, I assumed that I was just seeking to think for myself. All I wanted was freedom to be myself, and to, like, not wear the headscarf and not have that religious baggage. But then seeing someone who was able to call themselves gay and Muslim and be able to call for reform and have a whole different interpretation of Islam, I thought that was incredible. So it really opened me up to a new world. She really stretched my imagination about who I can be. So, I continued discovering myself, and that's for my studies. It's a lot of challenges in terms of, like, my family tried to persuade me in so many ways. They took me on a pilgrimage to Iraq with the hope that it would, change my mindset.
To Iraq?
Yeah, yeah, I think I can't remember, Tom.
No, you never told me that.
This was just after I finished my A-levels.
Okay.
And they took me to Iraq for a religious pilgrimage. Because there are religious sites there.
Yeah.
But it was with the hope that it would, convince me or wherever. But as you can tell, it's nothing changed.
Yeah.
It came back the same. I mean, it was difficult.
Once you've made that decision, I'm guessing in your head, there
just,
isn't really a way back from there, is there? It's
if they were going to change me, like, I was open to everything. I consider myself agnostic. I've never considered myself an atheist. It's because I'm open to knowledge. I feel like as a 21-year-old, especially, maybe it's because I studied philosophy and that's what philosophers are like, but I struggle to claim that I have all the knowledge about the world. I have the truth about the world. I feel like, for me, that would be like an arrogant step. I have a lot to learn, a lot to experience in life before I can claim that, oh, I know the truth. So, yeah, so nothing really, I still had challenges with family and so on, and they kind of realised that I was becoming non-religious, and it led to a lot of clashes. But obviously, eventually, I went to university, and that kind of gave me freedom to be myself.
Yeah, and you've recently, I know you've told me that you've been going into schools and doing talks with in some schools. I mean, what have those talks been about, and what kind of led you down that road?
Yeah, well, so it's with an organisation called Faith and Beliefs Forum. It's based in the UK, and they try to remove stigmas around faith groups. They want people to hear about these different stories. So they realise the diversity in the UK, and the aim is to raise awareness for like they want society to be tolerant and people to be empathetic. And sometimes RS lessons don't deliver that, so they have people going into the schools. So obviously I was in Birmingham, so I went to schools. I had the option to pick what schools I wanted to go to.
Yeah.
I intentionally chose to go to Muslim schools, well, schools that had high proportion of Muslim students, because I knew that my story would have a greater impact. It was, it did take like some bravery because I wasn't quite sure how Muslims would receive the idea that, I was come across as an agnostic. I questioned their religion and their beliefs. But, I'm so glad that I took the step because when I visited the schools, first of all, I wasn't judged. Um, they were very curious. This is from students from year 8 to A levels to 18. So, they're like 12 to 18-year-olds. And they've all been curious, they've all been kind. But the best thing is that in every school that I visited, there's always been either one or a few students, they were all girls, Asian girls, who would either speak up in class or come to me afterwards and they would say, oh, wow, thanks for that. Like, I'm going through the same experience. Like, oh, I'm struggling with the hijab. Like, it's not who I am, but it's what my family want. Or they would talk about, the fear around questioning faith. And for some of them, it was eye-opening because they were like, how are you doing this? Like, don't your parents know about this? I'm like, no, they don't know that I'm visiting schools doing this. But, I'm here to share my story to show that you're not alone. And that's when I realized that my message is, stories are powerful, especially when it's unconventional to hear a Muslim going from religious, someone who's very devout by their own choice and becoming non-religious. And, my message was just all about being brave, about speaking your own truth. And especially I feel like in the West, this is common knowledge. People talk about it all the time. Be yourself. You got free choice, free will. But in a lot of homes, in the UK, there's a lot of stigmas, there's a lot of taboos, and there is fear. And, so I was able to reach out to those kids that come from those backgrounds.
I mean, do you think there's a lot of, do you think there is a lot of pressure in there to wear the hijab? I mean, is there a lot of pressure there to do that? Based on you going in there, did you find that the reaction was, well, yeah, we are under pressure, or was the reaction, well, actually... I know loads of people, people are happy, a lot of women now, I feel like they do, if they wear the hijab, they don't choose to wear it. Yeah.
The issue is, a lot of times, okay, if you wear it when you're at the age of 11 or 12, you might be easy to conform. But then as you grow up, the stigma comes is when you want to take it off. That's where the stigma comes in. That's where the pressure comes in, because that's a stronger statement. Oh, you've wore it then to taking it off. There's a reason for that.
And what are the arguments? What are the arguments for wearing it? I mean, what if someone said to, I don't know, their family or whatever, I don't want to wear this anymore. What would be the key messages to say, well, we'd like you to continue with this? What would the reasons for that be?
Hopefully, I hope that those who do try to, if they do persuade girls to continue wearing it, it's because, it's for modesty, it's to please God, it's what God wants. It's very theological. Yeah. There isn't any rational basis behind it. There isn't any strong rational basis behind it. They might say, it protects you, from any sexual harassment, but then we know that you can be sexually harassed even if you wear modest clothing. That really doesn't have much to do with it. But yeah, so I feel like even when I studied looking at the hijab in theology in my religious study, like in my lectures, and I wrote a few essays on this. So if someone does want to read them, they can. You just ask Tom or me. But I find that it really is one of those, the hijab, so there is a good aspect to it. At the time, the hijab was introduced to protect women. Women were demanding the Prophet Muhammad, or saying, look, we're being sexually harassed, what should we do? That's when the Prophet commanded women, then cover up, be modest. And the women who used to wear the hijab in Arabia were the ones who were of higher class. that's how the system used to work then. But society has moved on now. If you're sexually harassed, you can go to the police. You can report it. People will be persecuted for that as well. There will be prosecutions. Back then, there wasn't. So the need for it, social reasons for it, I feel like they're not as strong as they used to be.
Yeah.
And it will be harder for girls to try and maintain it because you need to do something for reason. It's not enough to say, oh, you're going to be rewarded in the hereafter. People need logical reasons as well now. So.
And I mean, you going into these schools to do the talks, because obviously we talked about these protests, and it was, it was getting a bit nasty at times and a little bit problematic. I mean, you going into these schools, obviously you're not a politician, you're not a Majid Nawaz or whoever. You probably will be one day, but you're not yet. But when you were going into these schools, I mean, what did you have any problems? I mean, did it go fine? Was there any issues there? Any minor issues, major issues, or how did it all go?
Yeah, going into I didn't experience any major issues. I mean, we did have like some sniggering. Like I didn't realize because when I'm speaking, I'm just like looking straight.
Yeah.
I don't really notice it. But others, they're like, oh, you do have some like people are just shocked or they feel like, oh, that's what you're doing is not right. But no one said it to me, and I didn't really see it. But the responses have been positive. Like Muslim students are curious, and I feel like the desire to. I feel like there is an appetite to hear my message. It's not completely out of the blue to try and to just follow your own path or to try and make sense of the world.
Yeah.
Is what every Muslim is trying to do. It's what everyone's trying to do. And I feel like it's more now than ever. So.
What would be your kind of message then to the teachers in these schools? I mean, what would be, talking about the issues you just said, if there's somebody there, I don't know, a teenage girl, for example, who wants to follow your path, is there anything you would say to a teacher who's obviously got contact with that girl regularly? What can teachers do to kind of support this process that some young Muslim girls and boys might be going through?
Yeah, we did have that kind of issue in school because when I remember when I was saying my story, and then one of the questions at the end was from a Muslim girl, and she was like, I'm going through the same experience, and everyone turned towards it. The teachers are looking, and afterwards the teacher approached me and she was like, what do you want me to do? Like, I had no idea that she was going through this, and she was, she's struggling and so on.
Struggling with what? What was she struggling with?
She was struggling with the hijab. She was struggling with, like, kind of talking about things in her own home. Like, she didn't have anyone to talk to. Right, like, she had fears, doubts. And if you can't talk about it at home and your friends, and you're scared that your Muslim friends might judge you, who do you turn to? I was lucky enough to turn towards my teachers in school, and I was lucky enough to have friends who did agree with me. But a lot of people don't have that. They don't have those connections with their teachers.
Yeah.
But
how did the teachers support you then at that point? I mean, what did they do that helped you?
Yeah, I think it's just that I know it might just sound a bit basic, but they gave me the space to think for myself. They encouraged me. They intellectually challenged me. If I had come to a conclusion, they would like support me in that. And I think that if teachers, especially like for example RE teachers, like I'm hoping to become an RE teacher, and I hope that when I become an RE teacher, I will. I want to provide a space where kids can think for themselves. I want them to critically think of their own views and other views, not so that they can change it or anything, but they understand the limitations and the strengths of the views. Because a lot of times people learn about the strengths, no one talks about the limitations. And I think when people learn that, that's when they kind of become humble. They realize that, oh, I have no right to, I have no right to try and take too much control or anything like that. And I think that's what creates tolerance, is when you realize your own limitations. And that's something that I think teachers can do. But what teachers need to do is just provide that space where students can talk about things. And obviously, if you have a class full of Muslims, we're going to talk about, for example, homosexuality. What needs to be done is encourage people to think. We're not here to remind them, we're not here to change minds. but to put yourself in another person's shoe, to teach them empathy. So if you're to be empathetic, how would you react? Or say if someone, like, give them scenarios. Oh, for example, in school, what my teacher used to do to force us to talk about other views is that she'd make us go into a debate, and then we'd have to swap our views over. So we have to argue for a stance that we didn't agree with. I used to hate it back then, but it does force you to talk about the other view, and then you realise that the other side also makes sense. They also have reasons. They also have their own reasons for it as well. So I think it's just about providing that space.
Of course.
Students, yeah.
Of course, I agree with that. And in terms of faith schools, because obviously in the UK it's different to, say, for example, France, in that we have Catholic schools, Anglican schools, Islamic schools, different faiths. Now, do you think that's a good idea, or would you like to see secularization of schools?
Okay, so I feel like I'm very negative in this podcast. I disagree with everything. But I do disagree with the idea of faith schools.
Yeah.
I think it's for the obvious reasons that they create segregation. If we talk about if we say in schools that we want to be inclusive and tolerant, what message are we sending when we're segregating schools based on faiths?
Yeah.
It goes against the whole agenda of inclusivity and tolerance. So it doesn't really make sense having them, but I feel that the reason why they still exist is because faith schools do perform well. They're meeting the criteria. Some research will suggest that they're doing better. So inspectors and policymakers haven't really bothered about it. They don't really care so much about, what is the cultural implications? What is it doing? What is it teaching? What messages is it sending? I don't think it's the biggest issue, but I feel like it definitely doesn't help. I if I went to an all-Muslim school, and I know, especially, for example, in Islamic schools, for example, my friend works in an Islamic school, and she did a work experience there, and that was the time when the LGBT protests were going on, and the teachers were really concerned about teaching about LGBT rights in schools. They're like, yeah, but it goes against the Islamic values. But I feel like that wouldn't be an issue if it was a secular school. Oh, this is the objectives that we have to teach.
Yeah.
This is, we're not here to. I feel like people miss the whole point of education. They assume that education is here to brainwash people and persuade people and indoctrinate. It's not that. It's meant to be just to raise awareness and to normalize these stigmas. The UK does not want stigmas and these stigmas and all the taboos, because that's what segregates people. That's what creates fear. And the whole point of education is to normalize all of that. So I'm just thinking, how would Islamic schools go ahead with teaching about LGBT rights? I feel like
how would they? That would be my question to you. I mean, what do you think?
If we had that secular system, I feel like, it's their obligations. This is what they teach. They lead. They don't have to get personal about it. But if the teachers are Muslim and the school's Islamic, it's going to be difficult. It would be difficult. And I know the school that my friend did a work experience was in Cardiff, and they were really worried about it. So if they worried, I can imagine other Islamic schools are also.
Yeah, but I mean, how did your friend feel about it? I mean, were they happy to go ahead, or were they kind of questioning? How did they feel?
They really didn't want to go ahead with it. They were like, it completely goes against the Islamic values and this and that. My friend, she tried to defend the case that, oh no, you're here just to raise awareness, and it's about it's just a legal right. That's all. But they felt that there was a clash between their values. I feel like it's because they take it so personally. In the Muslim community, like I said, the politics and the private faith is very blurred, and I think that really makes it difficult. I feel some have the obligation, we need to just teach the Islamic values, we need to propagate. When you're in Islamic school, it's nothing. Propagation shouldn't be anywhere on the agenda.
Yeah, and that's why. I mean, I suppose the reason I was asking about this person and other people like that is do you feel that you have anybody appear a peer person, anybody in your peer group who is the same as you? I mean, is there anybody who is thinking exactly what you're thinking right now and doing exactly what you're doing?
When I met Irshad Manji and I followed in this and that, I was introduced to a whole community of agnostic Muslims and secular Muslims and progressive Muslims, reformist Muslims, and many ex-Muslims as well. A lot of my friends, they do think alike, but they're more on the side of just progressive Islam. So they want to see a progressive Islam. They don't adhere to the classical interpretations of Islam. They are free-thinking Muslims, But whereas with me, because I think it's because I've studied philosophy, I know the boundaries between, I find it difficult to just say, I believe in something, because I know, I can, right before me, I can see all the problems of it. It's something that I have. So
do you feel, I mean, this is quite a dramatic question, but do you feel safe? Do you feel safe, going on this path?
Well, I feel like if I had more freedom and if I did feel completely safe, I would be a lot more open about it. Because for a very long time, even though you mentioned that, when I was 19, that was the first time when I was, I was going through that little mini revolution or whatever it was. I was very open about it. But now I realize I've seen consequences, and that has really silenced me in many ways. On social media as well. Not entirely safe, of course. Even when I went into the schools, I was happy to do that, but I wouldn't be so happy if I wouldn't be able to post everything I said onto my Facebook or even Twitter. I have to be very careful about what I say, because it would come back to me. I mean, once, this was when I was 19, I had a friend, he converted to Islam way before I met him, and he, at the age of about 20, he came out as gay. And the Muslim community completely supported him when he was Muslim. But when he turned out as gay, the backlash was awful. The things that were said to him, I can't even fathom. So I was defending him in the comments. I wasn't reinterpreting the Quran. I was just trying to talk reason. That's all. And when I did that, what happened was someone in the Muslim community that he was friends with had screenshot everything I said, and that was then sent to the Newport Imam, the mosque leader, and that was then sent to my father, saying, why is she saying this? So it's even when there's a lot of, either the world is small or people are being censored. So
yeah, that is shocking in a way.
That just shows that how much control little communities can have. So I've been brave in doing this, and I feel a lot of people say, why don't you just go join these organizations like Faith to Faithlessness, and you can really share your story there. I was like, I can't do that, because whilst I'm brave enough to do that, I know the implications won't affect me as much as it will affect, for example, my mother or my family or someone. So I have to be careful. But I feel like being an RE teacher, being able to support students like me, is going to be the best way.
Absolutely. I mean, this is, from everything you're saying, this kind of, because you think about the government's kind of radicalisation strategy, Prevent, which is essentially asking people to come forward from communities to a governmental agency, But really, is that interconnectivity? I mean, what I'm picking up from you is, someone might be scared to even say it to a friend, I'm thinking about this, or I'm worried about this, because straight away that's a trigger for them, what you've just described, some kind of community, response, if you like, kind of peer pressure. So do you think something like Prevent, where it's like a phone line or something, in terms of radicalization, I'm talking more about extremism here rather than, kind of more mainstream issues, but is something like that the right strategy? I mean, for me personally, the right strategy in terms of tackling extremism, certainly from within the Muslim community, would be to promote people like you, and Majid Nawaz and, you know, these kind of folks to be able to, you know, press that message. Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult one, though, isn't it? Because there has to be something. You have to do something to try and prevent, to use the name of the organisation.
I think prevent has a lot of issues, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
I think people say they have a lot of problems, but it's better than nothing in terms of you know, controlling extremism in the country. We need something. It's not going to be perfect. It's something new. It has to be tested. It's going to be tested rigorously until we find a solution. It's not going to be, you know, because even now there's so much sensitivity around, for example, with like what is Islamophobia? You know, what if Prevent asks something about asks a Muslim a question, or is it Islamophobic to suspect someone? You know, there's a lot of sensitivities, but you know, I agree with Prevent, and I would support them. I realize their problems, but then you have to work on them. You have to give them time. But I feel like it's not promoting Majid Nawaz and people like Urshad Manji, or even people like stories like me. I feel like they will inspire people and to be brave, but it's not going to change. It might change people individually. People might then have their individual journeys, but it's not going to change people collectively.
I suppose the other issue you have as well is the fact that, you know, there is racism. There is in still racism in British society that then has the effect of, I suppose, marginalising or at least you know, giving further reason for saying, look, you know, let's not bother with this because look at the racism there, look at the kind of, and some of it may be wrapped up with religion, you know, ethnicity, lots of different reasons for that kind of attitude coming through, but there's no doubt it's there. So how do you think that racism impacts the problems that we're describing here? How does that impact the work you're trying to do?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, I'm not sure if you read Samuel Huntington's book, The Clash of Civilizations. He doesn't even call Islam a religion. He says it's a civilization because it's not just about beliefs and practices. It is linked to geographical boundaries. It is linked to ethnicities. It is linked to politics. You know, it is a civilization. I think, I feel like that's the issue. Like if Prevent, for example, suspect someone because of things they might be researching or people they might be meeting, and they have a right to suspect. That's the only way we're going to keep British people safe. If it happens and then we say, oh no, something happened, it's not going to work. We have to suspect before, you know. But then I feel like people can then play race cards, or do the police, are they generalizing? Seeing people, it's Pakistani men, or you know, it's they're the issue. So it is, and
it's very complex. It's a very complex.
It's very sensitive.
It's very sensitive, and it's very complex.
People realize from both sides is that if we keep our intentions pure, like if the Muslim community realize that they only want to keep British society safe, they want to keep their families safe as well as, you know, everyone's, then we have to kind of just not be so sensitive about the issues that happen. Oh, are they just picking on the Muslim? Are they just picking on the Pakistani community or the Somali community, for example? Like we have to be open to, because this is the mistakes are going to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of those issues we could literally talk for like another 3 hours about. Unfortunately, we probably can't because we're running out of time. But I mean, what you've said makes perfect sense to me. That it's just a lot of.
But actually, at the same time, for example, like the police has, like, you know, the security services, they have so much pressure as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, if something goes wrong, Muslims aren't quick to blame, it was Islam or it's Muslims or the mosque. They'll say, oh no, because the security, they weren't good enough. But when they do try, it's Islamophobic. So they both have to compromise and realize, okay, we're both going to make mistakes. We might end up generalizing, but we have to do something about it. If we're going to be sensitive about protecting our identities and protecting, our faith or our image in front of the UK and the world, then we won't get anywhere.
Yeah, because I mean, I think that was the criticism from the kind of right-wing element of the media towards the police in Rotherham, and places like Rotherham was that this fear of being called Islamophobic was one of the, or racist was one of the reasons that stopped the police from doing their jobs. And that was a real, I mean, for them not to do their jobs in that situation was a major dereliction of duty.
Yeah,
which led to probably, well, some of the worst stuff I've read, certainly in the last few years, in terms of crimes against young people, certainly.
Yeah.
So, but I'm not really sure what the answer is on that, because the politicians we have at the moment don't seem to be addressing these issues, which unfortunately, or at least they're feeding it, which is unfortunately leading to the rise of people like Katie Hopkins, for example, or whoever, because people don't feel like, I don't know, somebody like Jeremy Corbyn, for example, is kind of capable of acknowledging this situation, and at least acknowledging it, and then being able to move forward.
Yeah, I feel like I think you're right in saying that it is about ultimately promoting people like, for example, Majid Nawaz or Irshad Manji, or
is Hersey
for example,
too far?
That we need people who are in the middle. So we have the Muslim community, and then we have the British community. We need people in the middle who understand both sides. So the people who will tend to understand both sides. It's going to be the secular Muslims.
Definitely.
It's going to be the secular Muslims.
What do you think of Quilliam? I mean, I've obviously looked into them, and they look like they're doing some good work. I mean, obviously they've obviously tried to reach out. They brought Tommy Robinson in there. They tried to do things to kind of bridge, as you say, be in the middle, bridge the gap. I mean, what do you think of Quilliam? Do you think they're on?
Yeah, I mean, my views. Yeah, I think Quilliam is great. I mean, they're a think tank. The only issue is that they have this ideology and of reforming Islam or finding the middle ground, and people who agree with them or will side with them. But I'm not sure how convincing they're going to be, because I mean, you might just exist. It's great that you're the middle ground and the government can turn towards you, but how are they integrating with the Muslim community? How are they getting the Muslim community to come to them? I haven't really seen that, so I feel like it's just the Muslim community just looking at them. Oh, you're just trying to please the government. As I feel like they need to do more to get into the mosques, to get into the homes, and
So you're saying it's more an academic think tank, it's putting together reports, but it's not really doing much on the ground. Would be
nothing much on the ground. Yeah.
Okay, and unfortunately we've kind of run out. I could talk about this for hours and hours. But what are your kind of what are your big things that you want to do in the next 4 or 5 years personally? What do you want to see happen based on all of this discussion that we've had? What are the key things you want to see happen? So
that's a big question, Tom.
It is a big question, but there must be a purpose behind it.
Yeah. Well, the next step is to go into teaching. I have a vision where I want to see a community where people can freely express themselves without fear. I mean, I want to do something that is, when you want to make a change, you have to do something that is linked to you personally. And I think that's when the work is good. That's when the passion is there. And I feel like going into schools, teaching, giving people that opportunity is going to be great. I feel it's very, a lot of people say, oh, if you want to work for free speech and you want to, help people in that sense, why do you work for the UN? Why do you work for Amnesty International? There's so many other ways. Why teaching? Well, the thing is, teaching appeals to me because I feel like it's one of the few jobs where you're at the front line. You're at the center of making change. It's grassroots level. You make the change and you see it. I could that's why it appeals to me. I mean, if I'm planning my career will begin with teaching, hopefully. But I'm not sure what would happen.
Politics? Ruby, I'm convinced you could be Prime Minister one day. I'm absolutely convinced.
that is wow.
And I'm convinced I could definitely see you in politics. Maybe Prime Minister is...
Yeah, I feel like going into teaching will set the ground for me. It'll help me understand the community, help me understand people, and I'll have connections. I feel it's one of the careers that if I do want to progress, for example, into politics or anything like that, it would be a good foundation.
Definitely.
But we'll see how it goes. But that's I just got the first step in mind.
Ruby, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Inspirational as always. Every time we talk, I'm utterly inspired by just the general way you can articulate thoughts and everything else. So, this has been the Rebel Education Podcast. You can download this podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, and you can also listen on YouTube. We're going to be back again in a few days' time with another podcast looking at teacher mental health. I hope this one has given everybody food for thought, and I hope you can join us for the next podcast. Ruby, thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for everyone who's listening, who's reached this far.
Yeah, it's a long podcast, so thanks to everybody who got this far, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.